Hi, everyone.
Oh,
Here we are. Hi, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Um, First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge that Museum London is situated at the forks of the Deshkan-Zibi, Thames River, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapehoik, and the Attawandaron, and operating within the homeland of the Chippewas of the Thames, Oneida Nation, and Munsee, Delaware Nations. My name is Sarah Monroe. I am the Curator of Engagement and Outreach at Museum London. Um, I'm thrilled to present Seeing Red, Jay Soule in conversation with Sara Mai Chitty. I would also like to take a moment to express gratitude to our co-partner, co-host, Josh Lambier of Words Literary Arts and Arts Festival for this program. Uh, I'm happily joined by extremely talented artist, Jay Soule, Chippewas, and Sara Mai Chitty, who is the uh, Curriculum and Pedagogy Advisor at the Office of Indigenous Initiatives at Western University. So over to you, Sara Mai and Jay Soule. Thank you both for being here.
Um, Miigwech, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. Miigwech for being here, Jay. And it's been a minute since I've done a virtual session. It's so funny how this was like the thing during COVID, and then I'm like, oh yeah, getting acclimated to this space. So welcome everyone. And thank you for coming, making time on your Sunday afternoon to be with us all here today. So Jay, I just want to turn it over to you if there's anything you want to say in greeting to anyone, and to say a hello, or anything you want to add.
hey, Nicholas. Well, first and foremost, thanks for Museum London for hosting this and hosting my work. My name is Jay Soule. My artist name is Chippewar. I'm a member of the Chippewa, the Thames First Nation. I was part of the 60 Scoops along with myself and my two siblings. But before I go into my work, I want to first thank Sarah for the land acknowledgement at the beginning of it. However, I would like to plant the seed for institutions and schools, anyone listening who might see this video, is that I think it's time that we start moving past these land acknowledgements without some sort of concrete commitment at the end of them. And I posed the question to Museum London of what are you doing besides or beyond the land acknowledgement? Are you supporting Indigenous communities and seeing land returned to us? Because the inequity that Indigenous people face in Canada is due to the loss of the land, the loss of our resources, the loss of our traditional territories and hunting grounds. And I think it's important that if we're going to continue along this journey of doing these land acknowledgements, we have to really start talking about how is land returned to us, and what is Museum London's commitment to supporting Indigenous communities in your catchment area, in your surrounding area, to see land coming back to our communities, because that is what's going to help turn the tides for our communities to start being able to honor our sovereignty and care for ourselves in the way that was fully intended. So I pose that question not only to Museum London, but anyone else in any of the schools and so on and so forth who may hear this message.
I think that's such an important note to make. And when it comes to land acknowledgements, especially, we're acknowledging the treaties, but we're often not acknowledging the fact that those treaties are broken and the anti-Indigenous policies disenfranchise our people. So they can have that romanticized sort of aspect to them. Not that you did a terrible job, Sarah. You did the important thing, you acknowledged it. But in my job at Western, I do a lot of talk around land acknowledgements and these types of complexities. So we are here because of Jay's work on the Seeing Red exhibit. That is just closing today at Museum London. So hopefully those of you that are joining us today had a chance to get down to the museum and check out the works. But if not, we have a little slideshow carousel to show you some of the highlights. Jay, I wanted to invite you to just share a bit of the story about how this exhibit came to be at Museum London.
Um, so this is a big exhibition came up by, I was reached out to um, by Cassandra Getty, who said that she was interested in coming to my studio in Toronto to do a studio visit and come out and check out my space and check out my work in person. She said that the museum was looking to kind of bring in more people from the surrounding area and Indigenous people from the, from the London area and stuff. So Cassandra did a studio visit, and during that conversation, I was, talking about what work I would like to show. I was really interested in showing the movie poster work. I was kind of adamant about that wanting to be the work that I would show. I've been doing these sort of movie poster spoofs for more than 10 years, and other than shows I've kind of curated and put together myself, or art fairs and I've participated myself, I've had a really difficult time getting this work out into the public. Traditional institutions like museums and galleries, when you tell them you're an Indigenous artist, there's this kind of preconception of what sort of work that you do. So this has sort of blocked me in a lot of ways from getting this work out into the world without having to do the legwork myself. So yeah, that's kind of why I chose this, and explaining that to Cassandra, she was quite receptive to that, and thought, okay, this would be a good opportunity to show it in your 25 minutes from your family's traditional land. So it was it was good for all of those reasons.
And so the concept behind the posters is essentially like re-envisioning these famous movies and indigenizing them with so envisioning maybe an Indigenous narrative or Indigenous characters within them to critique representation in pop culture and contemporary mainstream entertainment media. And so when you walked into Museum London, your posters were like, I would say, yeah, movies, at least more bigger than movie size, or maybe they were movie poster size. I'm having trouble remembering, but they were quite large. But almost the first thing that you would you walk into the Museum London, you see the front desk and the gift shop, and then you go to the right, and then it's your posters. So, can you maybe speak to the the importance of having that representation, and the fact that you were the first thing most people saw if they walked into the museum the last 9 months, and how that representation is so important, or maybe not important, not putting words in your mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I think the representation is important, but to be honest with you, I had no idea where it was really going to end up. I mean, a lot of what I was doing was with the original meeting with Cassandra, and then I'm getting emails kind of describing where it's going to go, but I had no real idea of where they were going to go, how it was going to be displayed, because I live in Toronto, so it wasn't, it wasn't something I was really understood of how it would be viewed. I think for me, it was kind of not really even on my mind. I was just happy to have the work seen. And I don't know. I feel like also the work is very, very multi-layered in terms of it not just being about lack of representation. It's about the misrepresentation, but it's also just as a way of me just channeling some of my creativity. I've been a movie freak since I was a little kid. I've loved pop culture since I was a little kid. So these works are really representations of what I learned growing up about Indigenous culture, which is very little. And then as I've been on this journey of self-education, it's been, how do I take what I've learned and infuse it with a pop culture twist as a means of really meeting all audience, because my work can be viewed from anyone around the world, because we all know these movies. You look back at back to 1491. I mean, it's it's an easy title first and foremost, but you look at the concept of Native Doc and Marty go back in time, and the idea is they go back in time and they stop the Spanish from landing, and they're warning the Indigenous people of those islands not to allow the Spanish or the Italians to land, right? So it's like, how do you you take a really catchy name, or I start with a catchy name, and then I work kind of backwards on that and thinking about what images will go. And sometimes it's just storytelling, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's meant to be edgy, sometimes it's meant to upset people and make them think. But really at the end of the day, I'm doing it for myself, as on my own healing journey, and a way for me to reconnect with culture. And that's really the idea of behind the work of the lack of representation, misrepresentation, and then just doing it for fun and doing it for myself. And yeah.
Much, Jay. And so, as the images are cycling through, I just want to invite the participants to, if you attended the exhibit or not, if you see something you like here, which is your favorite poster that Jay designed here. Maybe it is your favorite movie. I invite you to share it in the chat. That one kills me, my Ingen Dynamite. So cute. That like just the yeah, I love it. The
Uh,
wolf teeth.
as my friend posted a picture of him in the 80s, and I actually used his face. I'm like, dude, you would totally, and I was like, man, you'd be like Napoleon Dynamite, like of the 80s, native Napoleon Dynamite. I asked him if I could use his photo. And so that's a photo of my friend Badassier, who's a powwow MC. And so that's, yeah, that's where that one was born out of. And interesting, actually, a curator I work with mentioned a couple of days ago, we were putting a proposal in for another piece of public art, and says, "Oh, Jay, who chose these images? Because these are all like really safe ones for the most part." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was Museum London. They said they needed to be kid friendly, so and student friendly. So like, if it was me choosing them, I would have maybe only peppered in a few sort of funny ones. I would have had them be chosen a little more edgy ones to kind of make people uncomfortable and create more conversation around that. But I do love this one too."
Um, it like they're just I feel like behind each one is an entire like new movie that like I start creating in my head. But it like, you know, when you were describing back to 1490, Back to the Future, back to 1491 with Marty, and like, you know, looking back, you kind of had a narrative there. You have like, you know, you have these movies sort of almost, it seems like, written in your own way. And I was just wondering, out of any of these movies, like, you know, if a director called you tomorrow and said, "Okay, look, Jay, we're gonna do your version of this movie," who would you cast? Who would you want to direct? How would you envision it? I would love to know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, all of these titles I have some sort of connection to. I've seen all of these films, so it would be really, you know, I think I'd be honored to really do any of them. I think in every one of these titles, you can find some way to infuse like Indigenous storytelling throughout all of them. But also, I think the Indigenous experience, which a lot of people don't understand, is like completely universal. You know, there isn't a native I know who hasn't kind of grown up on any of these films and seen them. And I think that's why people connect with the work, because one, you know, they're seeing themselves in it and feeling that connection. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like, you know, I did a whole Tarantino series once because I'm a huge fan of his work. So like Geronimo Unchained, I think would be really rad because it could still sort of be that, you know, spaghetti Western cowboys and Indians and you know, you could tell that story of like similar and, you know, just in the style of Tarantino of the way he films and his dialogue, I think would be really great. But I think also too, like the No Breakfast Club, you know, because you know, even within Native community, we all have those sort of different community members. We have the jocks, we have the nerds, we have the misfits, we have the pretty girl, we have the outcasts. I mean, all of, you know, and the representation of that movie, it's kind of a little bit of everyone. That's why it was such an iconic hit, is because we could all, anyone watching that film growing up could identify with one of those characters. And I think that's universal within the Native community, which makes it, you know, a way that we could also connect with the Indigenous audience, which for me is always my goal first. That's really who I primarily do the work for, is myself, and then the Native community, and then anyone who follows from there and gets something out of it. But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to choose which one it would be and who I'd want to work with. But you know, my love before becoming a visual artist was to be a filmmaker. So it'd be an amazing experience.
Um, Thank you for sharing that. I feel like Lisa Jackson, she just did the new Wilfred Buck documentary, and I feel like she would do a really good job at like an Indigenized Thomas builds the fire stay off or something, because it like the documentary style or like of like telling that story. But I'm like, somebody has to make this happen. Someone hear us and hit Jay up and make a cool movie. Yeah, lots of, oh, sorry.
Always wanted to do was to take some of these titles and just even my idea originally was to try to get funding for it to, instead of making the actual films, is to treat it as a series of work where I would say take 5 of these movie poster spoofs and do a series of like trailers instead. As a series of trailers, and then in between those trailers, take some of my product work, like the Mr. Genocide Magic Eraser, and do a commercial around Mr. Genocide Magic Eraser. Show another like trailer of the film. In between that, show Colonial Baloney or Cryzine as these commercials, sort of in between doing the trailers of it. Because I think the trailers would be a cheaper way of trying to make the whole film, but it would also, I think you could really, I think within a trailer, if you look at Tarantino's film with what was it? It was Death Proof and Planet Terror. He had these sort of like spoof commercials that were in between in the front of that in that sort of grindhouse style, and that that would be so much fun to create those, because you wouldn't have to go heavy on dialogue. It'd be these like little pieces of it that you could sort of create an idea around, and then like I said, throw the commercials in between and make it sort of still a feature, but like broken up into these segments with the commercials. I think would be really fun.
I could see it. And Tarantino, oh man, the soundtracks too would be so good. Yeah. As we're cycling through too, like a lot of these are sci-fi movies. Some are dystopian, like Blade Runner, for example. And I don't know if anyone in the audience has read Wabagija Grace's Moon of the Crusted Snow. But in that novel, and this is a concept I've heard from many different Indigenous people about how Anishinaabe were not unfamiliar to dystopias or to apocalypses. And while these are pop culture references, you really are layering them with historically trauma, so at some points traumatizing. Some of it is just Indigenous culture references, but some of it is about some of the things that our peoples have been through. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that idea of Indigenous people. We're living the dystopia. I mean, aren't we all living the dystopia? But just kind of bringing out those themes a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, most of my process starts with a good title. So if I can, be punny, moccasins on the loose, I mean, it's footloose, right? So like it's an easy title change. And, if you think about moccasins on the loose and we've heard about these communities out west who are Cree communities who are like really heavily influenced by Christianity and religion that don't allow powwow in their community. They don't allow ceremony, Indigenous ceremony in their community. They don't allow these things. They're so hardcore brainwashed in colonialism of Christianity and religion. So like it's very easy to think about, okay, how do you reimagine something like Footloose? And you think of that story of what Kevin Bacon's going through in that, and his fight dance scene in the warehouse. You think about that kid who's just wants to dance. He just he's seen it somewhere. He's been to another powwow. He wants to bring it to his community, and so in all of these, I can find storytelling and layers within all of those of the Indigenous experience. And I mean, sci-fi is just rad though too. At the same time, when you think of something like Blade Runner, again, it starts with a really easy title of Brave Runner. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a basic title, but it's like it becomes. I think about those titles of like, how close can it be to the original, so that the non-Indigenous and Indigenous viewer from around the world will recognize that title. And then I start working on that layers of storytelling, and do Android Buffalo dream, right? It's that it's a famous line from the film that I've just sort of indigenized. So all of it is about just really first coming with a good title and then sort of finding ways to infuse Indigenous storytelling, Indigenous experience into it, but also then finding ways to insert some of those aspects of the film into it so that the viewer who sees it will go, hey, that was one of my favorite lines. That was, a part that really stuck out to me. And at the same time, I'm also thinking about the original art of the film. So like, something like the Teen Wendigo, I mean, that's a very famous sort of poster with Michael J. Fox. I've just kind of taken it, like reimagined it a little bit. I've put in like a catchphrase of a Skoden t-shirt just because, at that time it was a really hot sort of catchphrase that was going around and people could sort of identify themselves and see themselves in there. But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, well, they just made a remake of the Crow. This one's sort of silly and lazy of just the Raven, the Crow. It's close enough, you get it, but it's a line from the movie, right? So, and you just make it a native hunk, which people like hunks, so it's easy. But yeah, I mean, and then even this, right? If you look at the original poster for Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is an amazing movie, um, and it's interesting. I've realized I've done. I've done a bunch kind of within that same world of Ferris Bueller. And it's just, again, it's like Thomas. It's like everyone knows, Thomas from Smoke Signals, and it's that, his big smile, and it's that classic original poster of Matthew Broderick on the cover, right? So it's, yeah, it's, all of them. I mean, I could literally go, I have probably 100 movie posters, and I can go through probably each one and give you layers to all of them that are way more than what you just see on the surface.
I love it. Even as we were going through there and thinking of like Teen Wolf and the concept of like, so like Teen Wolf is like not an Indigenous movie, and people would argue like, but I would say the concept of shape shifting like comes from our people's stories. And so, you've kind of taken it almost back in this case of like this concept of like shape shifting or turning into another being, or even the crow or the raven as like a the raven in like West Coast cultures as a like trickster character, as a sort of all about creating balance in the world and create and those kinds of things, like really bringing those elements of like of those cultures into your critique, or I guess your reimagining of these posters. But the other thing that I actually just was thinking about when you mentioned Android Buffalo dreaming of electric sheep, and I just was thinking about AI and artificial intelligence, and how it's infiltrating all of our lives right now. We might be really close to Blade Runner soon. I don't know. But it really got me thinking about the way that AI, like there's already been, for example, language speakers have flagged these books on Amazon that somebody's used AI to create an Anishinaabe language book, but because they used AI, it's like not appropriate. It's not, the grammar's incorrect, that kind of thing. And so for our people, so we think about things like cultural appropriation and the way that Indigenous imagery and concepts and teachings, they kind of get a little bit like they get absorbed and spat back out by Euro-Western cultures. And that's kind of what AI has been doing. You even see these weird Facebook pages of AI generated Indigenous art. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on those intersections of, AI art appropriation and, just sort of this, like, because some people are very pro AI and some people are not. So I would just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of torn a little bit on the whole AI thing because I have played with ChatGPT myself, and I think for text-based stuff, I think it's fantastic, and in terms of what it's actually doing and how it does it. But understanding as a visual artist and that our work is being taken and being used to train these models, and how artists' works is being ripped off. And how it is going to kill a lot of jobs within copywriting and in visual arts and that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's like any new technology that comes to us, is that it's always this first wild west of things, and the people who are leading that are the ones who are capitalizing it off right away and don't really care about the little people. They don't care about what's happening. They go ahead and just do it and then figure it out as they go and get away with as much as they can. But I think there's been enough pushback from the arts community, the literary community, and that people are kind of up in arms about it. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I heard about those language books, but yeah, I don't know. I think it has its. I think there's it's going to have its place. I don't think there's any way around that anymore. I think it's just a matter of how we're willing, as an arts community, to move forward to try to protect our intellectual property. And I think there's even there's people within Indigenous community outside who are also utilizing it to use it within their work. So it's like, um, how do we sit there and try to be bothered by it, yet our own community is accessing it and using it and that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's like, I'm sort of on the fence about it. I think we got bigger problems in the world to worry about than what's going to happen with art. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing original. There's nothing original about what I've done within my artwork. It's all, everything's been done. I'm leaning on 80s pop culture. I'm leaning on Mad Magazine, Crack Magazine. All of my subversive work is based on Garbage Pail Kids and Mad Magazine sort of thing. So, I haven't reinvented anything, and I don't think there's really that much place left in the world for this reinvention, which I don't think is bad. We're all influenced by each other. I think where it's dangerous is that when the thought comes out of it, where it becomes like not your original thoughts and ideas that kind of guide that work. So I think I'm more worried about that than what the images are going to come out of it, or the words that will come out of it. Because I don't know. I feel they say imitation is a form of flattery. I think it's just kind of lazy, but and I'm guilty of being just as lazy, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, there's like so much to that. And then now I'm just like, I'm gonna stop it there because I'm like, I just want to like talk about AI and ethics and the environment and all of these intersections. But one thing I do want to go back to is at the beginning, you kind of mentioned, like in terms of getting these movie posters in an exhibit, and kind of like these ideas around like what Indigenous art is and who an Indigenous artist is and what does Indigenous art look like, because there's definitely throughout I guess Canadian art history, there's been different periods where Indigenous art is like in vogue or like considered like in a specific sort of style is considered more highbrow and more lowbrow, those kinds of things. And I was just wondering if you could speak more to that experience of sort of being pigeonholed as an Indigenous artist, and like what people expect and what people think they're going to engage with when it comes to Indigenous art.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my art is actually in the style of what I do when I present this sort of pop culture Indigenous art, or what I call Indigenous art with a pop twist, or vice versa. I think it's been, in my experience, it's been more of a deterrent than a door opener. I've been excluded from gallery shows because the curators have thought my work was too angry, or it was too dark, and too truthful, and they were looking for a different experience. They were looking for beauty for the sake of beauty and storytelling, and very sort of pan-Indian, or and so I have been excluded many times, or doors that I've knocked on, and emails, and trying to show my portfolio and get into other exhibitions and stuff. It's been really difficult for me because they have this preconception of what is Indigenous art, and it's no fault of their own. It's just what Canada has presented, the United States has presented, of what Indigenous art is. We are the past. We aren't the future. We aren't moving forward. And so to be an Indigenous artist means you have to be living in the past. And for me, that's not my lived experience. As a 60s scooper, I didn't grow up around my culture. I didn't grow up around my traditions. I didn't grow up around our stories. And so me, as in my journey of self-education, I had to learn this stuff as an adult. And so not to take these teachings and these stories that I've learned and then put them into Indigenous style art, whether it's woodlands or carvings or any other sort of contemporary art. I do it through pop art because it's something that I know, it's something that I understand, but I also is so universal. People around the world everywhere will understand your references and see it. And yeah, I don't know. I feel there was an art gallery that I work with in Montreal who did a study about Indigenous artists, and her study concluded that Indigenous artists in Canada earned 40 to 60% and higher less than non-Indigenous artists because of our work being so devalued, but also like pigeonholed. You talked about a cultural appropriation. When you go into any gift shop in Canada, and especially in Old Montreal, every one of those gift shops are all selling goods from around the world that are coming from developing nations, and they're all knockoff. So how does a place like the Ashikan Culture Center in Old Montreal sell a dream catcher for $70 when two doors over you can get it for 23? And so the representation really matters, and appropriation and cultural appropriation really matters, because what it's done is it's devalued a work, but it's also led the audience to believe that that is only what Indigenous art is. That's only what Indigenous craft makers do and can do. And so for me, it's been really difficult. I know with the work that I create, if I wasn't flying under an Indigenous banner, I would be far more successful than I've had. And I mean, I've grinded. I've grinded hard for more than 12, 15 years doing what I do. And it's still a heavy grind in what I do to get my work out there. So I think it's, yeah, that idea around Indigenous art is only the past. We have to, as institutions and as curators and as schools and institutions teaching about this stuff, we need to move past that, because yeah, I mean it's held me back in a lot of ways. And if it wasn't for a lot of the opportunities that I've created for myself, I wouldn't be in the position that I am now to even get my work into a place like Museum London.
Yeah, and I even just think about how I don't know, like basic, like even just in terms of indigenous forms of art. So it's like, visual art. There's this, yeah, oh, woodland style, or like the Inuit style. That's what everyone thinks of immediately, right? But then even the way that other forms of indigenous art have been sort of dismissed or like turned into, it's a craft. It's not art, like, ash basket weaving or beading. And then I just remember, I can't remember the person's name, but I remember seeing a meme or something where the person was like, some of y'all are selling your beadwork for so much money, and there's these aunties out there that are just like selling their earrings for $40, and it's 10 times better than anything you've ever made. But the point that they were making is, when we, like create things, like Anishinaabe are creative. We're creators. We want to make everything beautiful. And like they were saying, those aunties, they'll beat anything. They beat, like, just for the sake of it. And I just think that there's like a conversation there around like the way that the way that art has been capitalized on in this world versus like creating art for the sake of art, which I think is what you're trying to say here. Is you're like, I made these posters for me and my community. I didn't, and like the art world is finally starting to get it, but they're just like slowed on the uptake, and I just think sometimes art for art's sake, and just like even for personal sake, it's just like so important, and we can like lose sight of that in these like exhibitions and capitalism and all those sorts of things. But yeah, I don't know if you had something to add to that before I ask my next question.
I definitely agree, but if you look at my art practice first and foremost is about creation for me.
Yes.
It's an outlet for me to get my feelings out, to get my ideas out, to share my thoughts, and potentially educate people, but also really just to inspire the Indigenous community and really just continue on this healing journey that I've been on through my artwork. At the end of the day, I don't really care if institutions and museums and gallerists want to show my work. At the end of the day, it's not going to stop the grind that I'm on. I'm still going to be pushing forward and doing what I have to do. I've learned some really important lessons on self-promotion and doing the grind yourself. So I'm not afraid to do that, and I think that's where a lot of people get that sort of hurdle, is they get a bunch of no's and don't have the resilience to kind of like continue on. It gets difficult to hear those no's. So creating those opportunities for yourself and funding, self-funding, I think is like hugely important as an independent artist, especially when you're not fitting into the mold that in the box that they put you in. And yeah, I think I do think it's changing. I think, like anything, if you look at what happened in the days of like graffiti art and street art, look where that has come to now, right? Once these institutions and these gallerists realize that there's money to be made from it, we have hopefully spent enough time that these doors will start to open for me and for my peers as artists.
100%. And like that got me thinking about the difference between some of your work. So being the movie posters, or like having an exhibit inside Museum London, but a lot of your other work is public art institutions. And I think we have some photos that we can show, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about like why it was important for you to have these sculptures, these installations in very public very public spaces that people are just walking around, and in Toronto, for example, and then they see this. And I think it kind of ties into what we were talking about at the beginning, because we're on Indigenous land, right? And so someone might see this as out of place, Indigenous art, or what is this? But it has a place because it's connected to the land and connected to us. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak about the difference between public art installation in the public outside and then inside the institution.
Yeah, I think what I mentioned earlier is about my work is, again, doing it first and foremost for myself, but I also try to be as diverse as I can and not sticking to one sort of medium. I think it's important to sort of experiment, try new things, but also, it creates more opportunity and other opportunities for you. Between doing my painting work, I'm making clothing, I'm making installations, I'm messing with some film stuff, some media. I mess around with a little bit of music sometimes. I try to just do anything and everything to channel like different creative outlets. So, I've only recently, in the last few years, started thinking about what is my work look like moving forward? Where do I want that to go? I've been grinding for 12, 15 years doing the work that I've been doing. And what is it going to look like in 15 to 20, 30 years plus down the road? And I've never really considered that. I think that's like sort of my age coming in, and sort of you start to think about your own mortality and where that's, when that's going to happen and where that's going to lead and what sort of impact you want to leave with your artwork. So moving into public art, I think I felt like it was an opportunity to get my work to a wider audience. And an exhibition like this, built on genocide, I think was a great opportunity to do that. This was an exhibition that took 4 years from the time I had the idea to actually getting it up. And this is, I handmade 1,300 bison skulls and created them in a massive mound as a means of just shedding light on the treatment of the bison out in the prairies, and the mass cull of the bison. That a lot of people don't know that Canada had a hand in that. And at one time in North America, from Canada to Mexico, there was over 100 million bison that were decimated down to 400 to 600 left in the wild. And there's these old historic photos of these big piles of skulls, and there's not many that exist, but there's also some on CN railways that they would kill the bison, they would skin them, they would discard the meat, They would keep the pelts, and then they would take the bones and they'd put them into these big piles and sun bleach them. They'd end up on trains. They would go out east. From out east, they'd go onto ships out to England. And then in England, they would be refined down and fine china would be made out of them. That's where the term bone china comes from. And so rich people, aristocrats, would be eating off the starvation of Indigenous people. So for me, I remember just seeing those photos, and it was actually on a research project about John A. Macdonald, and I was doing for another sort of subversive work I was doing about currency. Canadian currency. And when I saw that photo, I just got this idea of like, what would that look like to stand next to that mound? And or what would it feel like to stand next to that, and think of what our ancestors would have been thinking about when they saw all of these piles of bones of an animal that sustained them and cared for them and provided housing and clothing and substance through the food, and how every part of the animal was used. And I will admit, unfortunately, I only had the feeling once that I was looking for it. I don't know if that was enough or it is enough, but it was at around first 75 skulls that me and my team made. I remember when they left the studio, I sort of stood there and had a moment of just pure just emotion, and I actually, I wept there a little bit when that happened. And then I don't know, I never got that feeling again. Even when the work was done, I think you end up you know you do these work thinking you're going to get something else different out of it, and you don't. Anyway, and then the rest of it, as you see in this image, I surrounded it with these giant images. The idea was to have them be in this style of like sort of old Soviet propaganda or German propaganda posters. And the idea is, it was the very first poster was about what is the definition of genocide, and then I list what the definition of genocide, and then I say Canada's committed genocide in the following to Indigenous people in the following ways, and then I list 20 or so ways, or a bunch of ways, and then the 19 other images are images that sort of follow that linear story, from the very first one being John A. Macdonald, who gave that executive order to call the buffalo as a means of clearing Indigenous people out of the plains. They say it was for clearing the railroad, but that was their disguise of doing it. And then, yeah, each other image that sort of follows is like images that sort of describe those different acts of genocide. And I'm really proud of this work. It took 4 years of manifesting and figuring out to get it done, and it went up for 5 weeks, and it came down. And there's a lot goes into that, and a sense of loss when it comes down. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's really important that people get to see this type of work, and I feel for me going forward, this is the type of impact that I want to have throughout my work, is to really do these large scale projects that challenge people and really get, I guess, deeper into storytelling. Because my movie posters, I mean, it's, what I was describing, it is that big. This is huge. Has so much more educational opportunities, and way more opportunity to challenge people and make them think. So yeah, this exhibition is actually currently in Quebec City with a public arts organization called Ex Mural, and it's up for another 2 months. The great thing about this exhibition is it's not in this same forum. When they pitched me to do it, it actually went into this building that was built in 1683 in old Quebec City. So it went into this old French sort of building that was like a shipping merchant's building where he stored his dry goods or whatever. So it's got this sort of very kind of Paris catacomb like looking feel to it. And when they pitched me originally to have it go outside, it wasn't going to work. So we when they opted for it to go indoors, they just sent me some photos, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I agreed to it sight unseen, and me and my team, we just showed up, and it's really cool because it's super low ceilings, and we just lined the whole room with all of these skulls down the middle, placed a bunch of the images throughout. And I actually like the one in Quebec better than this first one because it just has such a creepy vibe to it. It's these old like limestone style brick, and it's super dark, and then with the lighting we used was like reminiscent of a mine shaft and really creepy. And it was like this work sat on a truck for 2 years, and I was really adamant about it having to go back into this form. So when I get the work back, I'm way more excited to actually get this work back and most likely put it up in the same way that I've just had it up, and not be so closed off to my imagination and to how it needs to be presented the next time. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I'll move on from that. Sorry if I went on a little long about it. But.
No, it's fabulous work. That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing those images and just to expand people's awareness of the scope of your work and your practice. It's really quite impressive. I'm going to access some questions from the chat here. Kelly Green, I just wanted to say, this is a comment, but she shares that a wise person once told her that everything's been done and nothing's been done. Your work hasn't been done before, although you were inspired by what came before. As most artists are inspired also, you're now inspiring new generations. And just for some context for our participants, we were just discussing how this talk today might be used as an educational resource for some of our school groups associated with the Thames Valley District School Board. So in that context, what do you aspire for the next generation of Indigenous artists? What do you hope to accomplish with your work and for them to kind of take that baton and run with it?
No, I think first and foremost, thank you for that comment. You know, sometimes you just, you know, you think about these things and you hear the words from others that can maybe sort of shift a little bit of that thinking. So it was a really, really beautiful feedback. So I'm appreciative of that. I often get that sort of question: is what do I hope to do with my work? And I don't know, I feel like it's such a hard question to answer because I don't hope anything. I actually don't really care so much, again, because it always goes back to what I'm doing is for myself, and it's for me on my education journey, on my healing journey, and what I'm doing for myself. I always feel, and I've always sort of been adamant about what you get out of it doesn't really concern me so much. Because the chances of me meeting you is very, very slim. And if I do meet you and it's bothered you, or it's upset you, or you like it or love it or hate it, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm willing to have a conversation with you about that, either to celebrate with you or to re-educate you or to help you understand it. So I think a lot of artists worry too much about what people think. And I don't. I kind of put the work out there, and just whatever you get out of it, you do. Do I hope to inspire? If anyone I'm trying to inspire is definitely Indigenous youth and other Indigenous artists, to sort of go, you know, try to use your voice if you can, and try to do it in a positive way, and don't hold yourself back. Don't worry about ruffling feathers if that's what you want to do. Don't worry about making people laugh. Don't worry about making them cry. Just do whatever you feel is good for you, and don't think too much about what the audience is going to get out of it. I mean, I think in big exhibitions like Built on Genocide, I don't necessarily even think I was thinking about what the audience would get out of it. I did it really because I wanted to know what it would feel like to stand next to a pile of skulls like that. And that's so just, you know, I don't know, selfish, but I wondered, that's what I was thinking about, of what were these people going through their body and their hearts and their souls and their spirits when they would see that. And yeah, I don't. Yeah, I hope that answered a little bit. But
I'll share another one. This one's from Ivan. Native culture has been successful in carving inroads into fine art and folk art, but why is it so rarely successful in terms of popular art? Where are the Indigenous rock bands, Indigenous comic books, Indigenous magazines, Indigenous editorial cartoons, etc.? Maybe if you could share some resources. I think that's what this question is essentially boiling down to, is like, let's turn some people on to Indigenous music and content that maybe inspires you.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the perception, that we don't actually exist within pop culture, and we do. I mean, I have many Indigenous other artists who are my friends and peers, musicians, filmmakers, writers. I mean, we have a huge community of creatives, and who are creating work within that pop culture realm. I think what the misconception is that pop culture is only contemporary, that it's popular culture now, and that's where it's to say that we don't exist within that realm, and we clearly do, and we have for a long time. It's just a matter of having the space, or being given the space to exist in that. And it benefits Canada and colonial Canada and their narrative to say that we are people of the past, that we are so far back that you don't have to think about us in that way. And that's partly what my work's about, is we are contemporary, we are here now, we are existing, we still exist. And it's really just about opportunity to share space with us, rather than only and like in my case, when I meet curators and gallerists who are asking what my work is, and I tell them it's pop art with an Indigenous twist, right away they close down because it doesn't meet that narrative of what they believe it is, and they start overthinking about how their audience is going to perceive it. Is it too angry? Is it too funny? Is it silly? Is it jaded? Is it too dark? Whatever, right? Um, and it also challenges them to actually have to think about their own education, right? They have to admit to themselves that the Canadian government and learning institutional facilities have lied to them their whole lives about Indigenous people, and so that makes them have to look inwards at themselves and ask the question, what else have I been lied to about? And that's, I have empathy for that, because that's really, really jarring for a lot of people that don't have the ability to ask that question and then to work through that question and have to admit to themselves that they have been lied to, that we are contemporary, we exist, we are here.
That ties actually into a question that came up around your vehemence and fierce energy. But just before I go into that question, to talk towards the pop culture, contemporary pop culture question, I wrote an article a long time ago for London Fuse, rest in peace. So it's not there anymore, about Canada Day, and I talked about the things that we think of as ubiquitously Canadian are really rooted in First Nations culture and traditions, like maple syrup. Like that is our jam. We had harvesting camps, like every year for Ongwe Hongwe for Haudenosaunee people. That's like the first ceremonies of spring. And Anishinaabe have similar, ceremonies to that. Even hockey, the game of hockey is highly contested as to who started it, but the roots are in watching like different Indigenous groups playing games on the ice with sticks and like puck like things. And then I even go as so far as to say even Tim Hortons coffee, if we consider that ubiquitous Canadian culture, coffee is Indigenous, albeit not to North America, but to South America, right? And so I think a lot of the times too, we have to think about ways that we have erased Indigenous culture and stories. Like, because even in those movie posters, when we're talking about like Teen Wolf, like a lot of our stories have been turned into these horror films, or like these different, or like, made into these sort of stories that like on the surface look like they aren't ours, but they actually are. And so I just wanted to plant that seed in some people's minds. But going back to what you were saying about like making people uncomfortable, or like or just sort of challenging what people know or do not know, Karen Doucette said, your vehemence and your fierce energy make settlers uncomfortable because it is truth in flesh, and it's easier as a settler to read about Indigenous peoples or experience their pushback in vanilla terms via government documents. That said, they want to know if you've thought about taking your art and turning it into theater or display or presentation or performance, tied to your belief statements and personal anecdotes, and like would use those posters as like a talking tool as part of it. And Karen also mentions just another settler's idea, but I don't want your work to be disregarded anymore, is what they say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think well, thank you for the question, but I also don't think it's important that you have to say it's a settler question or an idea. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, even in that, is like Indigenous people want to collaborate, right? Like it isn't. I don't think it's this black and white of like settler Indigenous. I think if you look at the spirit of what was originally intended, it was that we live on these two rows. You're on your path, we're on ours. It doesn't mean that there was never going to be collaboration. There was collaboration even to get to that. So, and I don't think collaboration and relationships just stop. So I think it's. Don't feel shy about making those sort of suggestions, whether regardless if you're Indigenous or not. But yeah, I mean, for me as an artist, and if you look at my body of work over the last 15 years, I have worked and I've dabbled in like so many different art forms. So for me, I would love to see some sort of theater production come to light. I'd love to see music come to light. I'd love to see the opportunity to experiment within these different medias. And I think, yeah, I think that would be amazing. I actually have done some performance art pieces that I have created. Many years ago, well, it was in around 2017. I had a friend who works in the film industry create a prosthetic of for my face, neck, and hands of someone with smallpox. And then I went out front of the Hudson's Bay Company at Yonge and Queen in Toronto during the Christmas displays, and I wrapped myself in a Hudson's Bay blanket, and it was, and I sat there on the street, and I just sat there, kind of curled up in front of these Christmas displays while people sort of just like walk back and forth. And some people understood what I was doing was a performance piece, and I got to chat with a lot of people. But it was, like that there was a performance piece to just really talk about the Hudson's Bay role in colonialism, and that they at one point were one of the largest private landowners in Canada, and the things they did to Indigenous women along the way, and the idea of a billion-dollar company like that still existing today, when all of the means of anything that Indigenous people got out of the Hudson's Bay is no longer existed. It didn't sustain us. It was very short-lived. And so, a performance piece like that, like I had a lot of fun doing it. I got a lot out of it. The audience, I believe, the people who engaged with it got some things out of it. But I mean, it was horrific looking. Like it looked at the prosthetics that my friend made were very real looking, and it was. I remember even one little kid was worried that it was hurting me, and asked me, "Does it hurt?" And and it was. You imagine all of these Christmas displays, and there I am wrapped in this blanket covered in smallpox. And, it also spoke to the smallpox being spread on blankets, right? And I would say it would be Army issued or ration issued blankets. And there was a good possibility that those were Hudson's Bay blankets. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely would love to do more performance work if that opportunity ever arose. I would definitely like to do that.
Thanks for sharing that. That sounds incredibly powerful. And I also encourage anyone watching to actually check out the Yellowhead Institute has a really vital report called the Cashback Report that actually talks about how Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Fur Trading Company and the sale of Rupert's land around the James and Hudson Bay is crucial to the foundation of Canada, and how that land was all completely sold without First Nations engagement. And it really adds a lot of layers to what Jay is talking about there. So if you want to learn more about that, it's the Cashback Report by the Yellowhead Institute. Really important work there. And then this actually ties in with another person's question. Kathy Vendrig asked, somebody else maybe asked it as well. They wanted to repeat a question where you mentioned at the beginning how we need to move beyond land acknowledgements and do something to support land back. What is the scope of that, and how can we support it in our individual communities?
Yeah, I mean, I get that question. I don't know necessarily that I have an answer for that. I feel as an artist, my job as an artist is to be what I call an ideas farmer. I'm just planting seeds and I'm watering them a little bit. I think it comes down to the settler community and allied community to start thinking about some of those. I mean, for me, it's as simple as just start returning land. I mean, if we know that 87 or 82% of the land in Canada is unoccupied, currently unoccupied Crown land, there's a lot of land that could go back to Indigenous communities. And for example, Chippewas of the Thames, we have one treaty that is for 2 million acres. Now, if you were to imagine about that 2 million acres being returned to a population of 2,600 band members, you know, that's huge. That strengthens our sovereignty. So that's why definitely the land back is important. But honoring those treaties, returning that land, and knowing that that amount of land currently exists to be returned. And I think where a lot of the problems happen within that land back movement is that's not really being talked about. We're not, people assume, the settler community assumes that we're talking about where your homes are, where your businesses are, where your family cottage is, where your businesses are. We're not talking about that. There isn't a single Indigenous person that is saying, you know, get out of your house, I live there now. That's not anything anyone has ever said or to even think. It's about that 82% of unoccupied Crown land that has been held in trust for Indigenous people. That's what we're asking to be returned, so that the same way that as Canada has built up its equity and its prosperity has been based on that land, you know, that's what we're asking to be returned. And if you think about 2 million acres and what the value of that is, it's in the range of $60 billion. Think of what $60 billion does for the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. The infrastructure that we could create around that, we could lease that land, we could sell that land, we could harvest that land. But also included that, you have to also consider that over the last 100+ years, taxes have been collected out of that land. We have never agreed that within our traditional lands and our treaty lands that settler Canada would collect taxes from citizens outside of from that. So are we entitled to some of that money, right? So longer answer, but the short answer is I don't know. It's not up to me to come up with these things. I feel my job is to have these ideas, plant a seed, water it a little bit, and collectively we start looking at that. Is it as easy as you as an institution sitting down and talking about that, as bringing together you know, Indigenous scholars, Indigenous artists, policy analysts, politicians, all of those sort of things? We start encouraging that as a community to come together, because I think that's what it takes. It takes a collaboration from everybody so that if and when that time comes, where there's a consensus of and that we've done these sort of consultations together to figure that out. It isn't as abrupt as some people would like make it out to be.
And I think it's so important to like what you said about how it's like I don't have the answers. I think a lot of the times Indigenous people are like, a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to do it, you know. And I've always, just in the line of work that I do, have always said, keep learning, keep engaging. Like with work like what Jay does, is it's like, it's art, it is accessible, it's like the movie posters, they're familiar, but there's other themes and concepts embedded in there that get this conversation and get you thinking a little differently. And as you start to engage with that, as you start to engage with Indigenous people more, and Indigenous culture and stories and history, that isn't, it's not just our history, it like Canadian history, but from an Indigenous lens, you start to see the missing pieces, and you start to see different ways that you can sort of like be a part of the solution too, instead of coming and being like, what do I do, what can we do? Wherever you are located, there are Indigenous people and they are part of the solution, and you engaging with them is part of the solution. And I have so many more thoughts and things. Even just when we were talking about cash, I was thinking about your little stickers that you did on money. And like, I'm even just thinking about Kelly Green. I know you're in here somewhere, and you did she's a Haudenosaunee artist who did work around money, and Kent Monkman too. But yeah, did you want to speak a little bit to that critique before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch really quick on what I said earlier too about being an ideas farmer. You know, if you think about how a farm actually functions, right? It does take really good soil. It takes good seed. It takes some water, and you know, it takes that little sprout coming up. I feel like I want to be there till the sprout comes up, but everything else that it takes to nurture that, it's the sun, it's the rain, it's the wind, it's the love and care of how you prune that, how you nurture it, and then how you harvest it, and then how you distribute that to people. And I think that's like the sort of analogy of what I think it is. So that's, I don't think it is me saying that I have these answers of what to do. It's me really wanting to put these ideas out there and understanding it takes collaboration. It isn't that any one person has the answers, and we have to, what I said is have those, you as an institution of Museum London and the City of London, what are you going to do to go beyond those land acknowledgements? How are you going to support my community of Chippewa to getting some of our land back? What role do you have? Is London situated on our land? Are you going to give us access to City of London land as an urban reserve so that we have the ability to build capacity in an urban setting where our treaty rights are still honored, say within an urban setting, because the prosperity that could happen from that and the engagement that could happen. So it's really, when you sit down with all these other people and start talking about things, I think, a lot of great ideas can come out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, land back, and even just thinking about space in communities. When I think about a city like London, the Indigenous gathering spaces that have been created, like say at Namarin Friendship Center, Nishwaснагong, Western Wampum Learning Lodge, even at LOSA, they like cram people into little spaces. Those have been spaces that have been created by Indigenous people for Indigenous people. But I think this is my just where I'm like, where I want to plug, if we're talking about developing at the forks of the Thames, and that's right where Museum London is situated, and that's right where, our people's histories and people have been gathering. We're going to talk about developing there. Who's going to live there? How is that space being used? And there's no Indigenous consultation. There's no Indigenous consideration in developing this real estate, this prime real estate that has deep ancestral connections to the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape. City of London could do a lot more work to engage the treaty holders in this territory. That's for sure. That's my little plug there while we have the platform. But do you want to add anything else before we wrap up, Jay? Anything I should have asked you but didn't?
We went on that because of my critique of really a land acknowledgement. So it's even something as simple as that. If we are going to be doing these land acknowledgements, I think maybe it would be worthwhile to maybe put a pause on those. So you as an institution or an organization or a business can actually sit down and discuss, okay, what can we actually do for us individually? And for me, it's as simple as saying at the end of that land acknowledgement, saying that really we understand there's an inequity to the land and the resources, and that we as an institution are committed to supporting Indigenous land back, and start saying that, right? Where even if it takes some years, which we know it will because of bureaucracy and people coming and going and so on, but there needs to be that commitment at the end of it to say, you're not just acknowledging that you stole our land and you're inhabiting and occupying stolen land. It needs to be at the end of it, just the next step of it. And that's what I'm really, my point of trying to push that next step to make you think about, but committing to saying you're doing it, to say we are committed as an institution to seeing land back. And that you don't need to have an answer of that. People can ask you, well, what does that mean? You can also say the same thing I said. Throw your hands up. I don't know what that means, but we're going to figure it out, and we're going to work with everyone to get to that point.
Yeah, there. I think that's a really solid point to end on, but I don't want to leave anyone wanting here. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Jay? Something I should have asked you but didn't, something you were thinking of saying but didn't get a chance to?
Oh, I think, I think it's been great. Thank you, Miigwech, for having me. I think it's been fantastic.
Miigwech to everyone for coming today. We really hope that this conversation will carry on through each of you into your classrooms, into your homes, with your relatives and colleagues. And miigwech Jay for your gift of art and for it gracing the walls of Museum London for 9 months. Sadly comes down today, but hopefully that just means that we'll be seeing you in the museum or your art in the streets of London sooner again than later. Miigwech Sarah and Josh Lambier for hosting this. Sarah, was there something you wanted to add at the end here as our Museum London facilitator?
Connection. Yeah. No, thank you so much, Jay. And thank you very much, Sarah, for enlightening our community on next steps and ways to continue to grow and develop and evolve our way forward, working with diverse communities throughout our city. Yeah, you make some great points. I love the idea of farmer visualization because, yeah, for me, you've planted some significant seeds to kind of continue the discussion and continue to grow personally and professionally. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy this all came together. Thank you to our participants and everyone attending. I see some familiar names from our community, which is really heartwarming. And we connected with folks all the way to Saskatchewan, Treaty 4, Southwest Saskatchewan, Bowmanville, Treaty 29 in St. Mary's, Kingston, Waterloo. Like this is significant. So thank you so much, Jay. And thank you so much, Sarah and Josh.
And Grudge, thanks for having me.
Miigwech. Have a great day, everyone. Bamapi.
Thank you.